spiritual excellence is, I believe, the purpose of any religion or any spiritual teaching. I think Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Moses, any teacher that has walked wanted to cultivate spiritual excellence in his disciples and their followers. In Islam, there is a tradition where once the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sitting with his companions, and a man appeared from out of the desert and walked towards them. And he was dressed in completely white clothing. And this was unusual because in the desert, it's hard to not get dust on your clothing, yet his clothing was completely pure white. And this man sat directly in front of the Prophet, knee to knee. And without even introducing himself or without any normal type of protocol, he simply began to ask the Prophet some questions. And what he said is, "O Prophet of God, tell me, what is Islam?" "What is Islam?" And the Prophet began to repeat to him. He said, "Islam is to pray, it's to fast, it's to bear witness that there's one God, it's to make a pilgrimage to the Kaaba, and it's to pay charity." And then this stranger from out of the desert said, "You're correct," which all the companions of the Prophet were sitting around him, and they thought this was kind of odd. Somebody's actually coming and asking the Prophet questions and then telling him he's correct. They were stunned. And then the stranger asked the second question and said, "What is iman? What is belief?" And then the Prophet enumerated the 6 pillars of belief. Belief in God, the angels, the Day of Judgment, the holy books, the prophets, etc. And in divine destiny. And after that, the stranger said, "You're correct." And then he asked him a third question. He said, "Ya Rasul, O Prophet of God, what is ihsan?" And the Prophet then replied, "It is to worship God, or to be in the presence of God, fully conscious and fully present, knowing that He's with you, that He's observing, that He's seeing you, and that you are with Him always." And again, the stranger said, "You're correct." And then he got up and he walked away. And then the Prophet was silent for a moment, and then he asked his companions, he said, "Do you know who that was?" And they said, "The Prophet of God, the Messenger of God knows best." And the Prophet replied and said, "That was the angel Gabriel who came to teach you your religion." So what a lot of the scholars and a lot of really the mystics and the spiritual people have explained from this lesson is that there are different layers and different levels in a spiritual path. There are different degrees of comprehension and development in a religion. And at the most base level, we're talking about external practices. We're talking about physical forms. We're talking about the rituals. And that definitely has its purpose. But then there's a deeper level where the Prophet begins now to talk about belief. And that's the level of belief, or the level of iman, as they described it in this case, where now it becomes internal. It becomes more internal. We're moving inward on that journey towards ultimately what is spiritual excellence. And that again has to do with really taking a deeper level of responsibility for your thoughts and for your feelings and beliefs. And then there's a third level, which is a higher state of consciousness. The word he used to describe it was ihsan, which essentially it means moral excellence or spiritual excellence. And I think ultimately this is the goal of a spiritual path, to reach a state of consciousness where we live and operate from a state of transcendent presence, where we almost become translucent in a sense, where it is no longer the ego that is operating through us, but more divine will manifesting through us. This is the destiny of humanity, and this is the full glory of humanity, and the ultimate beauty of God's creation for fully conscious beings to have completely surrendered their will or themselves, or that false sense of self, to a higher power, to a higher purpose. And I think ultimately that is the state of spiritual excellence, where we are no longer operating and living our lives from ego, but where we are living our lives from a state of transcendent presence, beyond mind. And this is a higher state of consciousness that you can say is localized in the heart. There are different states of or centers of consciousness within the human being, and the highest is the heart. Typically, most human beings are sort of stuck at the state of mind, and it's a very problematic state to be in. It's a very conflicted state, and we're constantly at war with ourselves, essentially. There's a higher state of presence or consciousness which is rooted in the heart. And I think this is really where life is pushing us to move towards, and where we have to go to, especially now in this day and age. Change is so critical. And I think we're being forced to get to that place, get to that point where we are now operating from our hearts and our souls rather than our minds and our egos. My personal spiritual path has been through what is sometimes called Sufism or Tasawwuf. And Sufism once was described by my teacher, by my master, as the way of the heart. And one day it really dawned on me what that actually meant. It didn't necessarily simply mean a way of, touchy-feely sort of love, what people typically think of love, and so on. One day it just struck me that what that meant when I saw it. I had seen it at our spiritual center, always written on the wall, Sufism, the way of the heart. And one day it just dawned on me what that actually meant. It meant a way of getting a person to live at a state of consciousness where they're beyond the self, beyond the ego, and they're operating from their true self, from their soul, from their heart.